Welcome into the PFN Bengals Podcast. I am Dallas Robinson. He is Jay Morrison. Jay, the Bengals are firmly in the playoff picture after their Week 14 win over the Indianapolis Colts. Jake Browning pulled out another win as the Bengals starting quarterback, 34-14 over the Colts. Bengals are now 7-6. They're squarely back in the AFC wildcard race, Jay. I mean, I don't think any of us expected this after Joe Burrow went down against the Ravens. And here we are 2 weeks later. There is no doubt the Bengals have a path to the playoffs, even if they're not in as a wild card right as we speak. They're not currently in the picture, but they're right there, and they actually absolutely have a chance over this last month of the season to get in.
Yeah. I mean, tell me a quarterback that's played better the last 2 weeks than Jake Browning. And it's not like they're playing slappies. I mean,
Absolutely not.
the teams that they beat are current playoff teams. One was on the road. I mean, it's been remarkable. And we'll get into the game here, but it's just, I think everybody kind of feels like it's that I don't want to say beginner's luck, but that whole kind of feeling out period and just waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's kind of it's built into the Cincinnati fan mentality that something is eventually going to go wrong. And you thought you saw that when the Colts scored 2 touchdowns in 25 seconds to have the Bengals blow a 14-point lead going into halftime. You're like, okay, here it comes. And then Browning comes out and was just 10 of 11 in the second half. Just terrific. It's remarkable. I mean, I thought he had a chance to play well. I thought a chance they had to be competitive and interesting. And what's happening it's just beyond, I think, anybody's expectations.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, he was number one in the EPA per play this week. He had the second best QBR in the league behind Matthew Stafford, 71.5 QBR, number 5 in completion percentage over expectation. I think he was number 1 last week. It's an incredible performance. And I think, especially from people that watched Jake Browning during the preseason and saw, obviously he was playing with backups and playing, against other backups. But when that's your vision of a quarterback, I mean, it takes a while, I think, to get over that kind of idea of this guy's upside. Here we are 2 weeks later. I mean, he's not Joe Burrow, but I mean, this offense looks better than it did with Joe Burrow playing quarterback, which I don't think you ever would have said. Jake Browning, 18 of 24 for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 1 touchdown on the ground. I think he was an incredibly impressive performance, not only just from a statistical standpoint, but how many times did he have pressure in his face and stood in the pocket, delivered the ball, found the right guy to throw the ball to. Incredibly accurate performance. We'll get into the other kind of weapons and the way that the coaching staff helped Jake Browning win this game and how they've been doing so these past couple of weeks. I think you really have to feel good about Jake Browning. And man, I think he's absolutely made himself a lot of money, right? over these past couple of weeks, whether it's with the Bengals or someone else. And maybe that's something we could get into down the line of is Jake Browning the long-term backup on this team? Maybe they could trade him for a pick somewhere down the line. Who knows? There are a lot of quarterback needy teams around the league, but you have to feel good about how he's playing. And it's just very surprising. It's very surprising to see this effort. You add in the running game that we saw yesterday from the Bengals from Chase Brown and Joe Mixon. What can't this offense do? They put up 30 points in the past couple of games, like you said, against defenses they're not the best defenses in the league, but they're pretty good. They're impressive. They're middle of the pack. You've got all these working pieces. You put up 30 points where Jamar Chase is barely involved in the offensive game plan. I mean, it's a really impressive performance, and I think it shows that the Bengals are not just, like you said, we're not waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. They're absolutely back in this wild card mix. And if they get into the playoffs, you absolutely have to feel like they can make some noise at this point too.
Yeah, because it feels like the defense is kind of turning a corner too. And quick quiz for you.
Another quiz from Jake.
Stats,
put me on the spot. Yeah.
A stat/quiz. Okay, so they've scored 34 in back-to-back weeks. How many times in franchise history have they done that?
That is a good question. I'm going to say 8.
A little more, 19. So
okay, way off. Cool.
They did it last year with Joe Burrow. They've only done it 3 times in a row once. So that's what's at stake this week. I don't know if they're going to get 34 against that Minnesota defense, but that just shows you how hard this is. And this is 1968 to current. So it's all the different eras and all the great offenses they've had. They've had an MVP in Boomer Esiason. Ken Anderson had those incredible offenses. I mean, 34 in back-to-back weeks, and you said Jacksonville had a decent defense, and the Colts
Absolutely.
didn't have a great defense, but they had an opportunistic defense, which
Yep.
we saw. They got the pick six, and they've had a turnover in every single game this year, which is amazing. So yeah, it's really really been impressive the way that they've kind of I don't know if I want to say they're playing better than when Joe Burrow was there, because Zach was quick to point that out last night in the press conference that they felt like this offense was really coming on before Joe got hurt, really since the Arizona game. And that Pittsburgh game, Browning's first career start, was the outlier that they lost
Mhm.
16-10. And there's some truth that it's different now. The leaning into the screen game, leaning into the run game, whether that was the plan all along had
Mhm.
Joe not gotten hurt, because it's December. You see that this time of year teams start going to the run. I don't know if that would have been the case had Joe not gotten hurt, but it just suits this offense perfectly with Jake Browning. It takes some pressure off of him, and you introduce Chase Brown into this mix, and he's just been fantastic. And it's all coming together. And there's a lot of fire Zach people out there.
Mhm.
After even before Burrow got hurt, and they are very very quiet right now. This has really been impressive. I mean, seriously, think about it. If they go on a run here and make the playoffs, does he get votes for coach of the year
Oh, he
for take a backup
has to.
quarterback and do if this continues? I mean, I think you would have to. He's never been seriously considered. Even the year they went to the Super Bowl, it was Burrow carried him, and I can't remember where
Mhm.
he was in the voting, but he was way down the list.
Yeah.
He's never been high on. He's never been high on the list of coaches most likely to get fired either. So that's a good thing
No.
for him. But yeah, I think a lot more respect is going to be put on him if we see this continue.
Absolutely. I think you would have to, and there are a lot of coaches working with backup quarterbacks around the league, obviously at this point in the season. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think you've seen this performance the past couple of weeks. I think you'd have to put Zach Taylor in there, and then also talk about Brian Callahan. The work that he would be doing behind the scenes in terms of game planning for this offense. It's going to help him this offseason, I would think, get a
He's going
job
to get
to
interviews at least.
work with a backup quarterback and design an offense like this. And you're right. Maybe better isn't the right word, but a little more cohesive. It looks more cohesive now.
Yes,
This offense
consistent.
they're running now, more consistent. I think you have to look at the running game when you talk about that too. I mean, 230 scrimmage yards between Joe Mixon and Chase Brown. Chase Brown, I mean, we saw him last week, kind of his coming out party. This week, I don't even know what you would call it. More than a coming out party.
Mhm.
3 screens for 84 yards, 54-yard touchdown, 22 plus miles per hour, second fastest speed in the NFL this entire season. I mean, I think we knew he was fast, but didn't know he was that fast. I mean, only DK Metcalf has been faster this season. It's incredible. Faster than Tyreek Hill. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
think I'm not sure if we knew that it was that type of athleticism that was available in Chase Brown, but I think he can absolutely become a weapon over the second half of this season. And maybe, we talked about it last week that the Colts play a lot of cover three, and the seams and the flats were going to be the place where they would attack. So I think we saw that bear out that Jake Browning, 14 of his 24 targets went to running backs and tight ends, and 12 of his 18 completions went to running backs and tight ends. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins had a little bit of contributions, but to see the Bengals be able to put up this type of production without throwing a touchdown to any of their wide receivers, while using Tanner Hudson and Chase Brown and Joe Mixon, and then you talk about the offensive changes I think that we saw from this coaching staff, just more creativity, I think, in addition to that kind of consistency. You're seeing things like a fullback dive to Joe Mixon for a first down, right? You're seeing Tanner Hudson go like an orbit motion.
Yeah.
You're seeing, at least runs go to the outside instead of just straight up the middle, try and create those explosive plays. All these little changes, I think that maybe we would have seen had Joe Burrow been here too. Maybe that was coming down the line. But I think to see that kind of those specific changes that this Bengals staff has made to make things a little easier on Jake Browning, combined with Browning's improved performance himself, this offense can absolutely put up points. We've seen that for a couple weeks now. I don't really see that changing anytime soon.
No, and this is speculation, but it's from talking to people. They haven't come right out and say it, but the thing is, Joe Burrow was very particular, and they were deferential to what he likes, and if he doesn't like it, we're not going to use it. And it was almost kind of, it was not like Joe Burrow was the offensive coordinator, but they absolutely tailored things to what he liked. I think Jake Browning's a lot more open to some
Yeah.
of these things. And I think that's why you're seeing some of this new stuff put in there. And then you see it works. And it's not like Jake Browning doesn't have a say, because they do. They ask him, and Zach talked about it, that going into that Jacksonville game, the morning of the game, they had their meeting, and he said, "Take that play off the call list.
Mm.
I don't like that play." And Zach didn't ask why. He just said okay, and he took it off the list for that night. And they still have tons of plays on that list that could get called. But I thought that was telling, that he is, as a not a young guy, but an inexperienced guy, willing to step up and say that.
Mhm.
And you go back to that, what they talked about in the Baltimore game, when he gets thrown in there after the Burrow injury, and they're asking him what he likes, what he doesn't. He's like, "I don't care, just call it. I'll make it work." And that was his mindset in that moment, when his head's swimming. But then he has time to process everything, and he does have thoughts. But I don't think he's as particular as Joe Burrow. And it seems in a lot of ways that the Bengals are like, well, you don't want to upset Joe. And
Mhm.
it's not like he's running the show, but he has a bigger say than a lot of players do. And now that it's Jake and he's more open to things, it just creates this opening where they are able to experiment a little bit, and then things start working and it starts building on it. And yeah, I mean, it's really been, it's not just the production, it's been the way they've gone about scoring 34 these last 2 weeks. It's been so impressive.
That's an interesting point too. It's like, I mean, Joe Burrow is the highest paid, or one of the highest paid players in NFL history. He's, won a college championship. He's a perennial MVP candidate. Obviously, he's going to have a say in how this offense works,
Mm,
and be able to do plays he likes. And Jake Browning doesn't have any sort of track record like that, so he obviously has to do what the coaching staff says. But that's good to hear, because I think that's kind of what you want out of a coach, right? Your job as a coach is to assist the players and get the most out of the
mhm.
players. And there's no point. I think that's such an old, kind of an old school NFL view, right? Well, you're doing the plays that we say, we control how this offense looks. You're trying to win games. You're trying to
Yep.
put up points. If the quarterback doesn't want to run these plays, then that's good to hear. I think that this staff is willing to hear what he says. Jake Browning is an incredibly intelligent guy, I think. Don't know him
Mhm.
personally, but he seems intelligent. For him to grasp, I think, these offensive concepts, and he's been here for a while, but to execute this offense like this, I think, is a really good sign. And it's interesting if you look at how this Bengals season has developed, like the different kind of offensive structures they've had to go through, from that first stretch of games where Joe Burrow couldn't move or thought he couldn't move,
Mhm.
to a little more open of an attack when he got healthy, to he's out and they're flailing against the Steelers, against the Ravens, and then against the Steelers, to where they are now, where it seems like they
Yeah.
finally found some sort of plan that's going to work every week. It goes back to the coaching staff. I think you have to give them credit for kind of working through this. It's a roller coaster of a season, more so
Mhm.
than any other season. The season that Joe Burrow tore his ACL obviously was a roller coaster. This is a different type of roller coaster, in a situation that they really haven't had to manage so far. I think they're doing a pretty good job of it, and I think you've just got to feel good that will continue pretty much regardless of opponent. I It'll be interesting when we get into this Minnesota Vikings preview here in a second, to see how this will be an interesting new challenge when they face this Brian Flores defense. But I think you have to feel good that at least every week they will have a chance to put up this sort of points.
Yeah. And maybe not need them. And they needed every bit of them against Jacksonville. They did not yesterday.
Yep.
That kind of goes back to where this defense is, and how this defense is starting to come along. These young kids are starting to grow up. Trey Hendrickson is getting into blackout Trey mode.
Yes.
It was,
Yes.
I mean, he may end up with another sack. He already had two yesterday. They are going to review the one where Minshew's arm got hit. It was ruled a pass and an interception for BJ Hill.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't even say it. There was a phone call to the press box. I don't know if it was Trey's agent or a representative Trey, but they were instantly asking for that play to be reviewed, for it to
Wow.
be a fumble so he would get the sack. Whoever it was that was calling, and Bengals were like, we go over these things every week. It will be reviewed this week. So, there, and it's not rare. We've seen these kind of things, these scoring changes happen.
Hmm.
And if it does, it'd be at 14 and a half instead of 13 and a half, and be right there with the league lead. He's been incredible. And I know I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but what we talked about with the offense rebounding from the giving up 14, that started with Trey. I mean, it should have been 14-0, and the Colts should have been punting from deep in their own end, and he has that ridiculous, two
Yeah.
steps, plow Minshew in the back, personal foul for roughing the passer, and then they go on this long 17-play drive, cut it in half, and then a couple plays later, the pick six. I mean, I'm sure he was feeling awful about that, and I really did want to ask him about it, and he was gone by the time we got out of Zach and got into the locker room. But he played like, just that blackout Trey mode after that. I mean, it was really impressive what he was able to do, what that defense was able to do. And, you just get some semblance of what they're doing on offense right now and get this defense to continue. And there's no reason to think they can't 3-1, maybe run the table. Anybody scared of the Chiefs right now? So yeah, it's really, really interesting and remarkable to be sitting here on December 11th and talking about the Bengals being 7-6 and in the playoff mix.
It definitely is. And just on that defense real quick, I think the run defense was really impressive. I mean, 46 rushing yards from the Colts, 2.6 yards per carry. I think that was a good sign. I mean, I think you kind of knew that the Colts would try and get the run game established, and they really weren't able to in any capacity. And they did stop explosive plays for the most part. I mean, Michael Pittman ended up with a decent day, but a lot of that came in garbage time. It wasn't really affecting the game too much. Pretty happy with that defensive performance overall. But I want to go back to the offensive line real quick though, because I think if you talk about how this offense is playing as a whole, you've got to give some credit to this front five that's been much maligned, I think, at various points this season, but is playing much better, Jay. And I think if this kind of offensive production is going to, and we saw Browning have some pressure in his face, but that happens in every game to every quarterback. I think for the most part, this offense is playing the best they've played all season, I would say. And that goes to the players. I think that goes to a little credit to Frank Pollock too, who I think has gotten they've been maligned this year a little bit.
Yeah, and it goes back to establishing the run a little bit and getting that going, and that just slows down the defense. And the sacks that they've given up, it's a volume thing where the Bengals are just constantly dropping back to pass. And yes, if you're throwing 40-45 times a game, you're going to take more sacks. Zach was really complimentary of the O-line in Browning's first start against Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh got some heat on him, and it's TJ Watt, it's Alex Highsmith. That's going to happen. And then the Jacksonville game, again, they played well in that game. It wasn't Jake Browning running for his life, and a lot of it's getting the ball out quick and all that. Going into Sunday's game against Indy, they'd given up a sack in 42 straight games. That tied the franchise record. It was the second longest streak in the NFL. The Broncos were at 50 games in a row, allowing at least one sack. And they finally did it. They pitched a shutout. They held the Colts without one. First time they'd done it. This is the weirdest thing ever. That it was the first time that they held a team without a sack since week 3 of 2021 at Pittsburgh. And that game snapped Pittsburgh's NFL record streak of 75 consecutive games with a sack. So it's just weird that those two long streaks started at the same point. Really and another part of this is, they're coming up with a better run scheme with Frank. And there's something to the fact too that, Orlando Brown was new to the line this year, and Jonah was new to the right side. So there was a little bit of you still got 4 returning starters, but there was some change there. Yeah. And this continuity, the Bengals now, the same 5 guys have started all 13 games. They're one of only 3 teams in the league can say that. The Bills and Broncos also. We saw this last year. The O-line kind of started playing better as the season went along. They went 15 games in a row starting the same offensive line, and then La'el Collins gets hurt in New Orleans, or not in New England, and Jonah gets hurt against the Ravens, and I can't remember the order that Kappa went down right before the playoff game. They all started falling. Ted Karras gets hurt in the Buffalo playoff game and guts it out, and it was not 100% for Kansas City. So, I'm sorry for the people out there that believe in jinxes, even though they're not real. But I know, I know some people are going to be mad, but it's remarkable. I mean, 15 in a row last year, the same 5 offensive linemen started, 13 this year. And I think that's part of it. I think that's why you're seeing this O-line starting to play better. And, maybe there's something that's maybe a deeper story diving into, asking these guys, does Jake Browning's style suit you guys better? Is this coincidence that all of a sudden the O-line is playing so much better since Jake Browning came in?
Yeah, and I think it's you're right that just running the ball more is good for the offensive lineman too. I mean, talk to any offensive lineman; they like to run block more than they like to pass block. They like to exert their will on the defense, right? And I think you can get an offensive line going like that too, and really get them in a groove to the point where it does help, and that continuity does help, and kind of that cohesive nature of knowing the guy next to you and how you're going to handle double team blocks and how you're going to run duo and how you're going to run outside zone concepts. You can't overstate, I think, how important that is to have that kind of relationship between those five guys who can kind of work as one unit together. So I think that's definitely been part of this kind of offensive resurgence over these past few weeks. Let's talk about where the Bengals stand in the playoff picture, because they're absolutely back in the race. But before we do, let's talk about the PFN merchandise store, Jay. We've got the holidays coming up. I've still got to do a lot of shopping. You might have to. I don't know. But the PFN merchandise store is now open for the holiday season. PFNmerch.com. You got shirts, you got sweaters, you got hats, you got more. Everything you need for the football fan in your life, including some Bengals gear, Jay. Maybe, I'm not saying you need to buy me a Christmas present, but if you did, I'm just saying it could be there. And I think they've got some promo codes too. So act now to take advantage. Go to pfnmerch.com, get all the gear you need for the football fans in your life for the holidays. Check it out now. Jay, let's talk about this playoff picture. Bengals are currently the 10th seed in the AFC, but I think that kind of understates where they actually are, because there are a ton of 7-5 teams in the AFC. You've got the Browns as the number 5 seed. They're 8-6. Then you've got the Steelers at 6, the Colts at 7. What'd you say?
Browns are 8-5, right? And then a bunch of 7-6.
8-5. 8-5. You're right. 8-5. You're right. They're 8-5, and then we got a ton of 7-5s. The Steelers, 7-6. God, I'm totally getting these records wrong. 7-6. Steelers, Colts, Texans, Broncos, Bengals, Bills, all 7-6. It's a total muddled mess here. New York Times playoff predictor has the Bengals at a 25% chance to make the playoffs. So 1-4. To me, I guess that feels about right, given the nature of where this kind of playoff picture is. But there are some teams that in this mix that I just don't feel very good about. I mean, I wouldn't feel good if I were a Steelers fan right now. The Texans are dealing with an injury to CJ Stroud. Looks like he has a concussion. Nico Collins got hurt. Tank Dell got hurt last week. You know, I think the Bengals stack up pretty well among this group of teams. The only team among this group I would say that's clearly better than the Bengals, I think, is the Bills. And if you look at point differential and stuff like that, I think the Bills are definitely one of the NFL's best teams, even if their record doesn't show it. I think the Bengals have a good chance. We'll get into this kind of schedule that they have over the rest of the season. Their schedule is tough, but it's not as tough as some of the other schedules that the other teams in this mix have to face. Jay, what do you think? Does 1-4 sound right to you in terms of a chance to get in as a wild card team, higher, lower? Like where do you stand on that?
I think their chances are higher. I mean, you mentioned some of the teams have harder schedules. I haven't looked at them all, but I think part of the reason that it's only 25% is all 4 teams remaining on the schedule are currently in the playoffs where they stand right now. And, you're talking about 4-0 definitely gets you in. 3-1 probably does. And I think, however they come up with these percentages, I think there's probably giving a low chance of winning in Kansas City. And I think that's a big part of it. And then just the struggles they've had against Cleveland. I'm not sure how much they look into past performance and stuff, but I feel like their chances are better. The Buffalo thing is amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, if that offside penalty is not called last night, we are talking about an absolute disaster. The Bills blowing it again, late game meltdowns, and the future of Sean McDermott and
the same week this
all that
huge article comes out about his leadership and everything. Yeah,
and that one offsides call, it just changed everything. I mean, now, I think people are already kind of seeing cracks with Kansas City. They absolutely look fallible now, and the Bills, they're playing really well, and Bengals fans can not relax, but knowing that they have the head-to-head on Buffalo is really important. And that's one of the things where, we've been putting out these playoff path to the playoff articles, and When I tweeted out yesterday that the Bengals were currently the number 7 seed ahead of the Texans, everybody was so confused about why, because the Texans beat the Bengals. And the important thing to remember here is anytime there's a multiple team tiebreaker, the first thing you do is whittle it down to one team per division. So if you got division teams in there, that you put them together in division tiebreakers and pull out the best one. So that's one of the really interesting things that for Bengal fans, you either want the Texans to leapfrog the Jaguars and win the division, or if that doesn't happen, for the Texans and Colts to stay neck and neck, because if those two finish tied, the way it stands right now, the Colts have the tiebreaker. So they eliminate the Texans. And then if it's Bengals Colts in a head-to-head tiebreaker, the Bengals have that edge based on yesterday's win. They have the head-to-head edge on Buffalo. They are never going to have the head-to-head edge on Pittsburgh and Cleveland, even if they beat both of them. Both of those teams already have 3 division wins. The best the Bengals can finish in the divisions 2 and 4. So you need probably Pittsburgh to crater and just get out of the mix.
Which they could.
Which they could. Seems more likely than not. And then Cleveland, they're already a game ahead. There's 3 wildcard spots. If Cleveland finishes tied with the Bengals or 1 ahead, it's not that big of a deal. But you don't want to be in this mix where you're with both of those teams, because you can't win the tiebreaker with either. If it's a multi-team tiebreaker, one of those teams is going to push the Bengals out of it. And at some point you run out of spots, and it's like right now they won the game in their 7th, and then 3 hours later they're 10th.
It's crazy. It's almost like not even worth talking about, because there are so many permutations that can happen. Right. I don't remember a season in recent memory where it was this kind of muddled and murky at this point in the season, with so many teams kind of in the middle of the pack. I mean, we do our power rankings every week. I can find like 6, 7, 8 teams that I truly feel good about. And then the rest, everybody else is kind of in the middle of the pack. So when you could consider the schedule for all these other teams, and the fact that they're all going to be playing each other, or at least a lot of them will be playing each other, it's really hard to figure out like what could happen, what might happen, what should happen. It's like kind of like that old adage, like go one game at a time. That's almost how we have to approach it, because we just don't know anything. It's so up in the air at this point in the season, more than I can remember in recent memory. All right, so this week against the Minnesota Vikings, it's a big game because every game is big at this point. Obviously, you need to win these games. It's not quite as big because it's in the NFC. It's not going to affect their conference record or anything like that. But at this point in the season, every game is critical. It doesn't really matter. I think that kind of detail doesn't really matter at this point in the season. One detail that does matter is the identity of the Vikings starting quarterback, which as of Monday morning, we're not sure who it's going to be. We think it'll be Nick Mullins. Why wouldn't it be Nick Mullins? He took over for Josh Dobbs yesterday. Josh Dobbs, who was, of course, the darling of the NFL, a month ago when he was coming in and winning games for the Vikings and keeping them in the playoff race. He's just absolutely cratered over the past couple of weeks. So the Vikings brought in Nick Mullins yesterday. We're assuming he's starting against the Bengals on Sunday. He started at points. He started 8 to 10 games for the 49ers under the Kyle Shanahan in the Kyle Shanahan offense. And he's bounced around since then. He's a journeyman NFL quarterback, I think we can say. Jay, I mean, this Vikings team, it's an interesting team to try and figure out. I mean, they won yesterday 3-0 against the Las Vegas Raiders in 2023, 3-0. They might not have Justin Jefferson this week. I mean, he came back yesterday from IR after missing 7 games, immediately got hurt again. He had a chest injury, apparently had to go to the hospital out of precaution. He did travel back to Minnesota, but who knows if he's going to play. We don't have any idea at this point in the week. It's an interesting time to be playing the Minnesota Vikings, I think we can say. Whether that means it's good for the Bengals or not, who knows? But it's certainly an interesting time to be facing this Minnesota team.
Yeah, I mean, not just the 3-0 win yesterday, but then they had their bye before that, and then the week before that, I think everybody watched that. Well, maybe part of it, maybe they turned it off because it was so bad. But that Monday night game that was 12-10 against the Bears. I mean, this is not an offense that I think scares anybody right now, especially if Jefferson's going to be out, and then you're talking about whether it's Mullins or Dobbs, whatever. I mean, it's not going to take 34 to beat this team this week. But it's the NFL. It's a team in the playoff mix. Brian Flores, the defensive coordinator, he was with the Steelers. He knows this Bengals team well.
Sure.
There's just, I don't know. it feels like that 4.5 point spread is a little high. I know what everybody's looking at, but I'd be surprised if this game looked like the Indy game where they won it by 20, where they build a 14-point lead at any point. This is a good Vikings defense, and yeah, that offense is challenged, but the Vikings defense, they're 10th in total yards allowed, they're 5th in rushing yards allowed, 14th in passing yards allowed, and 5th in points allowed. That's a solid unit, and they are healthy. They're like that Bengals offensive line. They do not have a lot of injuries over there. It's a cohesive group. Think about it. The Raiders aren't a great offense, but you hold anybody to 3, they should have won that game. And I can see this being a low scoring game where turnovers are going to be key, and that could be what works most in the Bengals' favor. The Bengals are currently second in the league at plus 10 in turnover differential. Vikings are -5. They are way down at the bottom.
So that line, I think the line has already started to move because I saw 3.5 points. So I think it's already started to move a little bit in the Vikings' favor. I think I'm not worried about this offense. Like they averaged 3.3 yards per play yesterday. I mean, it's just, and we didn't even mention Alexander Madison, their starting running back, sprained his ankle yesterday. He might not play. Ed Ingram, right guard, Brian O'Neill, right tackle, also were injured yesterday. I mean, this is just an infirmary for a roster at this point. I mean, you can't be scared of this offense. The defense is a different question, though, like you said, because this is just a crazy defense that Brian Flores is running in Minnesota right now. He leads the league in blitz rate, 44.3%. I mean, he was blitzing at over 50% of the time earlier this season. It's much different than what the Colts were doing. The Colts entered last week as the second to last in blitz rate. So it's a much different kind of scheme that Jake Browning is going to be playing. And then, Jay, I had you look up some numbers for me in terms of dropping 8 and rushing 3. The Vikings also lead the NFL in that. so they're leading the NFL in bringing blitz and in dropping 8. And I've never seen a defense be run like this. They're also number 1 in run blitz rate, according to Cody Alexander on Twitter. And they don't run a lot of stunts in games, though, in terms of defensive line doing twists and stuff like that, which we've seen the Bengals have trouble with. So I wonder if that's something Flores will pick up on and say, hey, maybe we'll add this to this week's game plan. I'm very curious to see how we talked about this offensive line is playing well, how they'll handle this blitz attack, how they'll handle things when the Vikings drop 8, and how we've seen Jake Browning do well with pressure in his face. But what's it going to look like if he's getting blitzed? I mean, could Brian Flores dial up blitzes 75% of the time? We've seen him do that in games this year. I could see him doing that. I think Jake Browning, like on paper, is the type of quarterback that Brian Flores loves to attack, an inexperienced guy who hasn't been in the NFL, who, might have a little bit of jitters or whatnot. I don't know. Maybe Jake Browning's these past couple of weeks have given him enough confidence to where he can go out and face a defense like this. I bet Brian Flores is licking his chops, but I'm very curious to kind of see how this turns out on Sunday.
Yeah, I'd like to go look. Maybe I'll do that first thing after we finish this show. But I'd like to look at the week by week blitz percentage for Minnesota. What's it look like when they play a team with elite wide receivers? Because if he's going to blitz a lot, either T or Jamar is going to be one-on-one. And Jake Browning, you said it earlier, he's not Joe Burrow, but he is a very intelligent guy. He's very good at reading pre-snap reads and processing. And if he gets a one-on-one with those guys, he's going to stand in there and deliver the shot. He's going to take the deep shots. He's not been afraid to throw the ball down the field through these first 3 starts. So it's going to be interesting. That dichotomy is crazy. I don't know if that's just all about keeping the offense off balance. Where it's like,
I think so. Yeah.
Are they bringing everybody or are they bringing nobody? I mean, it's really hard. We've seen Lou Anarumo do that, where he went heavy in the second half of that AFC Championship game and just started dropping 8 like crazy against Patrick Mahomes. That's really what led to that comeback and sent them to the Super Bowl. So you can confuse even the best of quarterbacks when you're mixing it up like that. So I don't know. I guess they don't either. They'll have an idea. They'll have a prediction of what they think he's going to do. They'll have to be prepared for both, obviously. But that is going to be one of the really interesting things to watch in that game. And I do feel like I should point out right now, I mean, you guys all know this at PFN. This is going to be a weird game for me because it's going to be the first Bengals game I have not watched in a very long time. Maybe the first one I've ever not watched since I started covering the team as a beat writer in 2012. My son graduates from college at 2:00 on Saturday. He's going to be on the floor at the Convocation Center at Ohio University watching the Bengals game on his phone. I'm sure I'm going to be up in the stands doing the same thing. Just a weird situation, but he's put in a lot of hard work. He's graduating a civil engineering degree. Obviously, very proud of Braden,
Yeah.
and cannot miss that even for a football game. So even for my job. So if you don't see tweets from me on Saturday about the game, that is why. But I will have plenty of coverage leading up to the game. I will be back down at Paycor Stadium on Sunday, the day after the game, to get reaction from the game. I just will not be there for those 3 hours when they play the Vikings.
Of course. And congratulations to him, an Ohio University graduate. We love it. And, civil engineering, he can try that out if he ever wants to come work. Then, we'll have him too if he ever needs a job here. So congratulations to him. That'll be great. The last thing on the defense for the Vikings, I would say, I think that we're kind of leaving unsaid is maybe the reason they do all this is they're just not that talented on defense. It's like they don't have a ton of top line players. Danielle Hunter is a really good edge rusher. And Harrison Smith, he's good. He's getting up there. It's a team I would say that's below average in terms of like talent base on defense, which I think Brian Flores is probably like working against that and trying to wreak havoc, and instead of just letting his guys go out and win, he's like, let's absolutely make this offense think about every conceivable possibility that could be coming on Sunday. So I would guess that's kind of his attitude towards defense these days.
Yeah, it's a shame because one of their best players was having arguably the best year of his career in Jordan Hicks, the linebacker, who's from right here in Cincinnati, from Lakota West, and would have been a really fun homecoming game for him. There is another Ivan Pace Jr.
Pace.
Yeah, this is homecoming for him as well. So that'll be cool for him. And then we thought a storyline this week would be Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson together again. And now maybe Justin Jefferson doesn't play, but another unique angle to this is it's different staff, but the Minnesota game, Jamar's rookie year, the season opener, I remember that entire preseason was, why can't Jamar catch the ball? Yeah. And that was his breakout game. It was early in that game, Burrow threw him a kind of a mid-range out and put it way out in front of him. He had to go get it as opposed to getting him involved with an easy one that he could maybe think about while the ball's in the air. He went out and snagged it, made a really good catch. Then they come right back with a 50-yard touchdown. And then Jamar's been Jamar ever since then. So this will be the first time they've played the Vikings since that opener in 2021. Bengals won that game in overtime. A lot of storylines for an AFC NFC game. That's just not usually the case, but a lot of interesting links here with these two teams.
Yeah. And if Josh Dobbs gets on the field again, they'll be playing him for the second time this year.
Yeah,
they already faced him in Arizona, so kind of game planning for him again. I don't know. Let's get into our bets and our prediction for the week, Jay. What do we got for this week? Last week we actually did surprisingly well, all of us. I can't believe it. How do we do last week?
Yeah, we crushed it last week. So Brian went Raiders +3 at Minnesota. Didn't even need it. Well, wait a minute. That was a push. I marked that down as a win. That is a push. Okay. So that is the only game that we didn't win. He did have a teaser, Bills +8.5, Bengals +7.5, both won outright. That was easy. You went Denver +3 at the Chargers. They won that outright. And then you had the Bengals money line for yesterday and won that. I went Bengals -1.5, won that. And then Thursday, easiest pick all year, New England Pittsburgh over. It was 30.5. There was no way that game was going to go under. It was over by halftime. The point total was over by halftime. The game was not over by halftime. So I am now at +18 on the year. You have moved up to -50.
Let's go.
Getting closer. And Brian is at +14. I am suddenly in the lead. I'd marked that down as a win. I thought Brian was still in the lead, and he is not. That was a push last week. So what do you know? I'm in the lead.
All right. So this race is just as tight as the wild card race between you and Brian. This is going to come down to the end here. I'll start off with mine since I'm really not in the race anymore. I'll start off with mine not. I'm actually going to go against the Broncos this week. I went with them last week. I'm going to take Detroit -4 against the Broncos. I know the Lions have been struggling, but I say get him back home and let Jared Goff get back into a rhythm. I just can't imagine he'll keep playing the way he is and keep turning the ball over the way he is. So I just think the Lions are more talented than the Broncos. 4 points is enough for me to go with Detroit in this one.
So it's Lions +4?
-4.
-4. Where is that game?
In Detroit.
In Detroit. Okay, yeah. I don't know. I have a hunch the Packers are going to win that division. Lions just seem like
That's spicy.
Yeah. My non-Bengals bet, I'm going opposite Brian. I'm going to go Dallas +1.5 at Buffalo. I'm not buying the Bills. At Dallas seems like a different Dallas team. It was always can't beat the good teams.
Yeah.
They are on one heck of a roll, and I don't know. I've got a hunch that they're going to win that one easy. Buffalo kind of got away with one Sunday night, so that'll be my non-Bengals one. As I mentioned, Brian went with Bills -1.5 in that game, and he's going with Philadelphia -4 at Seattle, looking for the bounce back for the Eagles. I'm not sure I like that one either.
I do like that one. I do like that one. I think Seattle's been reeling a little bit, and I know the Eagles have been too, but I think they're a much better team.
They may not have DK Metcalf. He may get suspended.
That's true. That's true. Okay. My Bengals bet and prediction. I'm going to take the Bengals. I just can't go with a Minnesota team that is starting Nick Mullins, might not have Justin Jefferson. There's just too many injuries, and I don't think the Bengals will put up as many points as they have these past few weeks. So I'm going to go Bengals 23, Vikings 14. I do think they'll cover, so I'm gonna take the Bengals to cover. And I saw 3.5, but they would cover 4.5 too. I think these teams are probably pretty close in where they are right now. But with all the injury issues that Minnesota is facing, and how well Jake Browning is playing, they can keep getting Chase Brown and Joe Mixon involved to get this running game going. I just don't see any reason they can't make it 3 in a row. So I'm going to go Bengals 23, Vikings 14.
Okay, I like the 23 number. I'm right there with you. I'm going 23-20 Bengals. I think they win. Hard for Minnesota to. Although one thing I noted, Indy was 5-1 in road games before they came to Cincinnati. Minnesota has now won 5 of their last 6 road games. But still, coming to Cincinnati is going to be a little different challenge. I think it's going to be close. Don't like that number at all. So for my bet, I'm going to do a teaser. I had it at 4.5, so we'll stick with that. I'm going to tease the Bengals up to +1.5, and then the under was 39.5, so I'm going to tease that up to 45.5. I think it's going to look like what I thought the Indy game was going to look like. Very low scoring, kind of a grinded out game, and I'm going to go 23-20.
Okay. All right. So I think we both think a decently close game and kind of a similar result here. So we're going to be rooting for that, or we're not going to be rooting, but Bengals fans will be rooting for that. And then we'll watch the AFC playoff picture and see where the Bengals kind of stand after this week. I mean, they could be back right in as a wild card team. They could be further out of the playoff picture than they are. It's totally up in the air. There's a lot to watch this weekend, and we will be back next week to recap everything else. Jay, anything else before we go? Congratulations to your son again.
Oh, thanks.
Enjoy that ceremony. Anything else before we sign off?
Yeah, this is scoreboard watching Nirvana for you Bengals fans. A standalone game at 1:00 on Saturday, then you can go root for all the other outcomes that you need immediately, because the Steelers and Colts play right after that, and then the Denver Detroit game you mentioned Saturday night, and then all the games Sunday. There's a lot of rooting interest in games beyond the Bengals, and then the same thing next week. They play a standalone game on Saturday against the Steelers. You can ignore your family all day on Christmas Eve and watch football and root against the teams that are.
I plan to.
Yeah, all of you guys can do that. So this schedule. It's weird. I can't remember the last time the Bengals have ever played back-to-back Saturday games. But it's if that's what you want to do, if you want to root for the Bengals and then turn around and root against all the other 7 and 6 teams, the schedule couldn't have lined up any better for you.
You could spend the entire day on the couch, order some DoorDash, order some PFN merch. You've got your entire Saturday and Sunday planned out for you here. It's a big week for the Bengals. So come back next week. We'll recap everything that went down, good or bad, see where the Bengals stand, see how Jake Browning is playing. We'll go over it all next week when we're back to recap week 15. So until then, thank you for listening. Like and subscribe and review, and we will talk to you next week.